heating your home in January and February in Canada is not a luxury, and it does not make those Canadians polluters. They're just trying to survive.
In a preview of what we will likely see in the next federal election, opposition leader Pierre Poilievre versus Justin Trudeau in the House. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Jamil Jivani. Okay, Brian, this was sort of a glimpse into the future of what we might see between a election battle between the new Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, and Justin Trudeau. What happened?
Well, for the first 2 days that Poilievre was in the House of Commons as Conservative leader asking questions, Trudeau wasn't there. And he was doing quite a good job boxing against Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. I'm not sure why they're letting her answer questions on issues like the cost of living, because she just seems out of touch. But when Trudeau showed up on Thursday for a brief stop in at Canada, as Poilievre said, to refuel the jet before he heads off to sing Mr. Roboto for Shinto Abe's funeral, he gave back as good as he got. So, it's going to anger some people that I'll say this, but Trudeau can be very good at defending himself in the House of Commons. He knows how question period works. So as good as Pierre Poilievre is, Trudeau can be good at defending himself. But the issue that Pierre Poilievre is going on right now, I think long-term is going to be difficult for the Trudeau Liberals to defend on. And that is the fact that they're going to raise EI premiums and CPP premiums on January 1st. Those are two payroll taxes. So employers pay them, employees pay them. That goes up January 1st. And on April 1st, the carbon tax goes up. And what Pierre keeps saying is inflation's out of control, cost of living is going up, people can't afford more taxes. Will you cancel the tax hikes? Trudeau, while he's good at the technical aspects, doesn't have a good answer for him. So I think long-term, Pierre keeps doing this, it's going to be tough on Trudeau and the Liberals to push back.
Jamil, we know that Justin Trudeau is an unserious leader. We just see his antics all over the world and how he acts even here at home. We know in the last federal election, he says he doesn't bother himself with such things as monetary policy. So he is unserious. He doesn't take the issue of governing this great nation of ours as a serious job. He likes the other things to do. He sort of likes to go around, travel around, hang out with his buddy Gavin Newsom in California. But there's one thing that Trudeau is very good at, and that is campaigning. As Brian just sort of alluded to, that is his strength. How do you see this lining up when we eventually have a federal election?
Well, yeah, we've been waiting, throughout the Conservative leadership race for this moment where we would finally have a Conservative leader who can start to hold the Trudeau government to account. It's been months and months in waiting, and Pierre Poilievre, I think, has started off hitting the ground running. Things are looking good in terms of his ability to communicate about these messages, as Brian said, being very clear about no new taxes, keeping things simple. But to your point, Adrienne, Prime Minister Trudeau is a very effective communicator. And I do believe that, some of these escapades that he's been involved in these international travels are part of how he crafts this sort of image where he invites criticism, like singing Bohemian Rhapsody the night before the Queen's funeral. He invites criticism, and then all the legitimate points on policy get sort of absorbed into this bigger thing of everyone's mad at Justin, everyone's rude to Justin, people don't understand him. And he allows for, I think, legitimate points about how he's failing as a leader in the country to be lost in the shuffle over some of the more culture wars or tabloidy criticisms that people might bring about him. And I think it's part of an effective strategy to make it seem that no matter what he does, people are going to be unhappy, so that when someone like Pierre Poilievre brings legitimate criticisms to the table, a lot of the Trudeau Liberal base is sort of desensitized to any legitimate political points that might be made.
And more broadly to that, Brian, there are, and you recently wrote about this too, about Trudeau being unserious. Mm-hmm. And you gave a long, very rigorous argument about why that case is. Not that it's a very difficult argument to make, but one of the things that you brought up was just more on the international stage. Yeah, okay, he gets goofy and sings a couple of nights before the Queen's funeral, Bohemian Rhapsody in a bar where he's at the fancy hotel he's staying at. Yeah, he goes and runs around India and dresses up in various costumes. he's a guy that can't remember how many times he wore blackface. Like, he's unserious. I think we all agree. But one area that is very critical as as the world security remains unsecure, and with Russia even threatening nuclear attacks just as early as this week, as the UN summit was going on. We have partnerships with international players called the Five Eyes. You allude to it being as the Three Eyes. Now, most Canadians don't know what the Five Eyes are. They don't really pay attention to that. So break that down. Why does that matter? And why is it critical with a leader like Trudeau not being taken as serious as he should be?
Well, I wrote the column after hearing Brian Mulroney speak at a charity fundraiser in Toronto, and he was, it was a fireside chat, and he's being asked about part of what he did on the international stage. And he's describing being asked down for lunch at the White House by George H.W. Bush to discuss the intelligence that they have ahead of the first Gulf War, the amount that Canada played in getting rid of apartheid, that our allies really looked to us, they counted on us, they confided in us. And now we're at a stage where the Five Eyes have become the Three Eyes, because the Five Eyes network, it's been around since, shortly after the Second World War. It consists of Canada, the United States, the British, the Australians, and New Zealand. New Zealand and Canada are not seen as serious. They're not seen as reliable. And the other three have been excluding us from security arrangements. That should concern all of us. But, to Jamil's point, he gets a pass on these things. He, relishes in fighting over his silly costumes in India or his singing abilities. But when it comes down to actual governing and policy, these things matter. And the one thing that struck me listening to Mulroney speak, and I've had the same reaction when I hear Jean Chrétien speak and Stephen Harper, and these are men that I haven't agreed with all of their policies, but you listen to them and you're like, wow, we used to have serious leaders in this country. We used to have people who understood public policy, who understood foreign affairs. And Trudeau campaigned on Canada's back. Well, we're at the back of the line when it comes to being taken seriously. We're not legitimate, and his government has done nothing to improve our standing on the international stage.
All right, Jamil, last word to you. The notion of this current Trudeau government, buttressed by the NDP, we know it's virtue signaling. It's they don't really seem to understand or appreciate the realities of everyday Canadians. But Pierre Poilievre does. He speaks to that. He talks to that.
From a prime minister who burned more jet fuel in 1 month than 20 average Canadians burn in an entire year. So will the Prime Minister ground the jet, park the hypocrisy, and axe the tax hikes?
But he himself would be considered somewhat of a polarizing figure. So how do the Tories sort of combat that, you're extremist, you're scaring people, which ironically the Liberals are the ones scaring people, but how are the Tories going to combat that?
I think the biggest strength that Conservatives have is just leaning into the substance of what they're trying to explain. Because to Brian's earlier point, a lot of the decisions that the Trudeau administration is making now are going to start being felt by hardworking people over the next few months. The introduction of new taxes, the continued increase in the cost of living, it's tough, and people will see it. No matter what Trudeau says, no matter how effective he is at getting his message across through the mainstream media, at the end of the day, if Conservatives can speak to the reality of what people are experiencing because of Trudeau's policies, I think that's going to be their ticket to cutting through all the white noise and really getting across a meaningful message to people. And I think, Adrienne, what you're saying about Trudeau being unserious, I think a lot of people feel that. And as they start to experience the policy consequences of an unserious prime minister, that is where Conservatives will have an opportunity to present an alternative. And the good thing about Pierre Poilievre, regardless of how people feel about him, he is a clear alternative. Whether you love him, you're unsure of him, whether you want to see more of him before you get on board, I think what we cannot deny is that he represents something different. And I think Canadians are looking for that.
Well, the country needs a change. There's no question. We'll cover all angles. Log on to TorontoSun.com and hit that subscribe button for more stories like this and coverage you will find nowhere else.